Hey, I'm Sam. Welcome to Brickwall Pictures. Today I am running a single elimination tournament to crown the best film noir ever made. And that includes classic noirs and neo-noirs. It includes both of those. 64 noir films enter. Only one will be crowned the champion. I've done a couple of these tournaments in the past. So far I've done the best director of all time tournament and one for the best westerns ever made. Now we are doing film noir. Here's a quick peek at our starting bracket. There are 64 movies in here, and there are 64 because this bracket maker limits you to 64, and that's with their pro subscription. So there are only 64, meaning there are enough other noirs out there that we could do a second installment of this and have the winner from this one go up against the winner from the other one. And they're in a randomized order, and to prove that, here's the randomized button. I'm going to hit this a whole bunch of times. You can see it's swapping that order all over the place. I'm not looking, and I'm going to stop, and this is the order we're going with. So our first matchup, randomly ordered here, is Kiss Kiss Bang Bang versus Road to Perdition. Road to Perdition is more of like a classic film noir. They're both neo-noirs. They're both more modern than a lot of the noirs on this list. Road to Perdition is more traditional. It's got that gangster flair to it. It's got like the lingo and the dark lighting and the gangsters and the wardrobe and all that stuff. But I think Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is stronger. I think it's a better movie in general. It's really funny, which is something that Road to Perdition isn't going for. But I also think it's more compelling on the crime story, the noir plot elements. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is a Shane Black movie, both written and directed by Shane Black. I think his first movie that he decided to direct himself after being a screenwriter for a long time, a very prominent screenwriter. And he loves the noir genre. That is apparent in all of his work. He's got one other one in this list, which will be The Nice Guys. That is included in this ranking as well. But Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is going to take the win over Road to Perdition. That's going to move on. Okay, next up we have two fucking juggernauts going up against each other in the first round here. The Third Man versus the Maltese Falcon. These two are both massive. These are two that could easily move past this first round if they weren't randomly matched up against each other right off the gate here. My gut feeling is the Third Man. I think the Third Man is a bit stronger. So I'm going to move on, but that's a pretty tight one. Okay, Chinatown versus Light Sleeper. This one's easy. I think Chinatown is one of the favorites to take the whole thing. It feels very much like a traditional noir, but it is obviously after the 1940s, 50s kind of era. Chinatown's going to win. I like Light Sleeper, but Chinatown's going to win. Okay, Brick versus American Gigolo. We have another Paul Schrader. Paul Schrader also did Light Sleeper. American Gigolo versus Brick. Brick is probably one of the most recent movies on this whole list. And I talked about it recently on my Ryan Johnson tier list. I think it's a really good movie for a first feature, but it is rough around the edges. American Gigolo doesn't have that rough around the edges quality. I guess a lot of people don't like this movie at all. I think it's really good. I think Richard Gere, it's my favorite Richard Gere performance, though I'll say I haven't seen, there's plenty of his movies I haven't seen, though. I'm not like a Richard Gere fan, but I think he's really good in this. I think Schrader is in really good form in the director's chair. The Giorgio Moroder soundtrack is awesome. The soundtrack is not at all noir, it's but very synth heavy. You don't really get that in noir typically, but it's still a film noir story. And American Gigolo is going to win here. Okay, Under the Silver Lake versus Thief. This is an interesting pairing based on how completely different they are. Under the Silver Lake flew under the radar, and it's also a bit divisive, I guess. I think it's a great movie. Thief, though, is a classic from Michael Mann. I think Thief's going to get the edge here over Under the Silver Lake, but I do think it's a good movie. Okay, Rififi versus Sin City. These are two kind of polar opposites again. Sin City is like the most stylized noir can get. It's kind of like over-exaggerated noir. It's almost like a parody of noir, but not quite. It's got all the noir tones ratcheted up to 11, as far as it can possibly go, honestly. Most black and white movies are like lots of gray tones. Sin City is very much black or white, not a whole lot of gray tones. So there's some red and some yellow and stuff. There is some color usage, very stylized. Sin City is really fun and excellent. Rififi is more of a classic noir, but I will say Rififi is a noir in some ways, but it also feels a bit less noir first and foremost, and more like just a general crime thriller, a really great heist film and a really great crime thriller. I think if we're going on the strengths of noir for the noir tier list, I think I might go towards Sin City. But if I was just picking which is the better movie, it would be Rififi, I think, because Rififi's excellent. But I think for this noir bracket, I'm going to go Sin City for this first round here. Okay, next up, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie versus Le Samurai. The Killing one is from John Cassavetes. A very unusual pick for his career. He doesn't have any other movies like Killing of a Chinese Bookie. It's not my favorite John Cassavetes. I love John Cassavetes. I adore him as a filmmaker. This is actually my least favorite movie of his that I've seen so far. And I did watch his director's cut. I actually think I might prefer the non-director's cut from him because a lot of the sequences that felt like they went on for way too long and were not adding anything to the movie are the sequences that are apparently only in the director's cut. So while I pretty much always opt for the director's cut, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie may actually have benefited from a little bit of brevity that was added in the first theatrical cut. I'm going to go Le Samurai. We just did a review on this channel for Le Samurai. I had Bryce join me for that one. Check it out. We talked about it for like 30 minutes. So for my thoughts on Le Samurai, check out that video. Okay, The Big Sleep versus Blood Simple. This is a classic noir versus a newer noir. The Big Sleep is a Humphrey Bogart noir. It's also him in the Philip Marlowe character, which is the famous Raymond Chandler Private Eye character who's in a bunch of film noirs, versus Blood Simple, which was the debut film from the Coen brothers. These are two heavy hitters. The Coen brothers came out of the gate so strong with Blood Simple, and it's still one of my favorite movies from them. And I enjoy pretty much everything they've done, with the exception of Lady Killers and Intolerable Cruelty. But even then, I don't think those are like terrible. I think they're terrible by the Coen brothers standards, which is much higher than a lot of directors' standards. The Big Sleep has that classic, timeless quality, and also it was made during the film noir boom. It's much more noir first and foremost. I think I'm going to go with The Big Sleep for this one, but it's pretty tight. Okay, Cruising versus The Hustler. This is a pretty easy one. I think The Hustler takes it pretty handily, even though it's less of a conventional film noir story. It's less of a crime plot, more of a personal drama about like alcoholism and whatnot. But Cruising isn't an amazing movie. So Hustler gets a pretty easy one in this first round here. Okay, next up, the other Shane Black movie, The Nice Guys versus The Long Goodbye, which is a Robert Altman movie, and again featuring the Philip Marlowe character, now played by Elliot Gould. I like Shane Black's movies. The Nice Guys is hilarious and really good. If it was up against a weaker contender, I could see The Nice Guys getting through the first round pretty easily, but The Long Goodbye is, I would say, like a black sheep contender, or what do they call it? A dark horse contender. Not black sheep, dark horse. The Long Goodbye is a dark horse contender, I think, to go the distance, I would say. Nightmare Alley versus Brute Force. Nightmare Alley is the recent Guillermo del Toro movie. Nightmare Alley, though, is also, that was a book adaptation, and that book had previously been adapted into a movie that was made in, I think, the 40s during the heyday of the film noir boom, or at least around there somewhere. I haven't seen the original, and I didn't really like Del Toro's take on it all that much. I didn't enjoy that as much as many people did. Whereas Brute Force, on the other hand, I enjoy a whole lot, and that one's moving on. Okay, The Trial versus Devil in a Blue Dress. This is interesting. These two movies are both probably a little underrated. The Trial is a classic. It's directed by Orson Welles. It's extremely surreal. It's a Franz Kafka adaptation. I would say it is the best depiction of nightmare logic, or even just like dream logic in general, that I've seen in a movie that old. I think Orson Welles was really pushing the envelope in terms of like stylized surrealism on film for a feature-length duration. Devil in a Blue Dress is good and underrated and underseen. It is a Denzel Washington neo-noir. Don Cheadle is phenomenal in this movie. He has a supporting role. He really steals the show. Like, Denzel Washington's great in it, but Don Cheadle is like on another level. It's my favorite Cheadle performance, and he's a great actor pretty much always, except when he's trying to do a British accent for Steven Soderbergh. The Trial's got to move on here. Okay, Drunken Angel versus Mulholland Drive. We have Akira Kurosawa versus David Lynch. That's a big pairing. Mulholland Drive is going to move on, though. Mulholland Drive is, I would say Lynch's entries here are all kind of like dark horse contenders here, because you might not think of David Lynch as a film noir filmmaker, but he really is. Noir informs so much of his style and like the music he chooses to use, his lighting, not so much the plot elements. Like, film noir doesn't usually get surreal and dreamy like he does, with, like, I suppose, the exception of The Trial. So it'll be interesting to see that go up against Edel and Chewy. But Mulholland Drive is going to move on. Okay, The Player versus Croupier. The Player is another Robert Altman. I would say it's much less of a film noir than The Long Goodbye. The Long Goodbye is like hardcore, straight up neo-noir. The Player just has like some noir tones to it. It's widely categorized as a noir. I wouldn't necessarily think of it as one if I hadn't seen so many people categorize it as one. Whereas Croupier, I think, is a film noir. Also a very underrated movie. I'll talk about this a little bit more when it meets its next matchup. Le Cercle, Rouge versus Ace in the Hole. This is a tough pairing. These are two old school movies. Ace in the Hole is, I think, 50s, maybe late 40s, whereas Le Cercle Rouge is, I think, like 1970, the very beginning of the 70s. These are two excellent movies. I highly recommend both of them. Le Cercle Rouge is Jean-Pierre Melville, again, the same director as Le Samurai. I think Le Cercle Rouge is even better than Le Samurai. I hadn't seen it at the time that we recorded our Le Samurai review, otherwise I would have talked about it. Le Cercle Rouge, I think, is my favorite from Melville that I've seen so far. And that's including Army of Shadows as well, which I can see is in the next matchup down here. Ace in the Hole is wonderful. It is excellent. It is a Billy Wilder movie, who's one of the noir greats and one of the greats of his era, one of the best filmmakers of his generation, without a doubt. He has, I think, 3 movies that are going to be in this tournament, and I think Ace in the Hole is the first that we've encountered. I think I'm going to go Le Cercle Rouge on this one, though. Okay, Army of Shadows versus In Cold Blood. In Cold Blood is the adaptation of the book famously written by Truman Capote. It's the subject of the movie Capote, with that excellent Philip Seymour Hoffman performance. In Cold Blood was when that book was adapted into a film. Really good performances, great cinematography, but it's going to be Army of Shadows here. Army of Shadows moving on. That's another Jean-Pierre Melville movie. I think Melville had 3 movies move on. Yeah, Melville had 3 movies move on in this first half of the bracket. Now we're going to the other half of the bracket. Okay, To Live and Die in L.A. versus Mikey and Nicky. This is an interesting pairing. These movies are both underrated, or maybe Mikey and Nicky's more underseen, whereas To Live and Die in L.A. is underrated. Tends to get weaker reviews than I think it deserves. To Live and Die in L.A. is excellent. To Live and Die in L.A. has a story that is more of a film noir story, but not a film noir style, whereas Mikey and Nicky has the film noir style, meaning like the characters are film noir and the wardrobe and all that is, but the story isn't really a film noir story so much. This is kind of an interesting pairing. They both kind of like have like one foot in noir and one foot in something else. Mikey and Nicky's John Cassavetes again, though this time he is an actor, not the director. Though it very much feels like a John Cassavetes movie because it is like a wall-to-wall improvisation, and it's him and his frequent collaborator, Peter Falk, in the 2 lead roles. They are those 2 titular characters. They're both excellent. Phenomenal movie. I think I'm going to go Mikey and Nicky on this one, moving forward. Okay, M versus I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. These are 2 great movies. Yes, these 2 are both early 30s, like early 30s. These are probably 2 of the oldest movies on this list because the film noir boom came about a little more in the 40s. So these are kind of like proto-film noirs that kind of preceded the genre. M is going to move on, though. The influence that M had is impossible to understate. And I think it's a little undersung for its innovations. People talk about its innovations, but I kind of think it deserves to be talked about in the same breath as like Citizen Kane, as far as like big leaps forward. I think like the biggest leaps we have, like Birth of a Nation's a huge leap, M is a huge leap, Citizen Kane's a huge leap. Those are all very influential films in cinema history. Okay, Stray Dog versus Touchez Pas au Grisbi. Stray Dog is another Akira Kurosawa. This time Kurosawa is going to move on. Touchez Pas au Grisbi, I did not love this one. I found this one a little underwhelming, to be honest, but it is a classic of the French film noir. And film noir, by the way, is one of the only like distinctly American genres, even though the title sounds French, and it was embraced by France after the fact, but it did originate in the U.S. Okay, Shallow Grave versus Scarface. This is an interesting one. If you're thinking of talking about the Scarface remake, I'm not, because that one I would not call a film noir at all. This is the original Scarface, which is a film noir. The remake I love, and I do think the remake is actually a better movie than the original, but the remake ditches the noir stuff, and it's just a gangster movie. The original is a film noir. That being said, I am still going to go Shallow Grave, which is a movie that a lot of people probably haven't seen. It was how Danny Boyle got his start. It's not the most like capital N noir, if I want to judge by that metric, but it is a quite good thriller. It has some roughness, some plotting, but it gets great once it like finally kicks off and all the dominoes are set up. Okay, this Gun for Hire versus Blowout. This is a pretty easy one, I think. I think it's Blowout all the way. Okay, LA Confidential versus Anatomy of Murder. LA Confidential I see get really highly praised, and I think it's good, but I'm always a little surprised to see it rated in like the top 250 movies of all time. I think LA Confidential is good, and it's quite a good neo-noir. It has a really good shootout, for one thing. But Anatomy of Murder, again, another one of the Dark Horse contenders. Anatomy of Murder might be a favorite to go all the way. This is a courtroom drama film noir. It's about a murder investigation, but it has all the noir staples of like the crime plotting, of the femme fatale, of the hard-boiled dialogue, of the stark black and white visuals. Anatomy of Murder is excellent. If you haven't seen this one, I highly recommend it. It's honestly a favorite of mine. Okay, up next, Blue Velvet versus Touch of Evil. These are two fucking huge ones. Lynch is my man. He's my dog. So it would be really hard for me not to give this to Blue Velvet, because it is one of his most directly a noir genre entry. I'd say Blue Velvet and Lost Highway both feel like his two most full-blooded noirs. Alongside Twin Peaks, honestly. Twin Peaks is very noir-y. Well, so Touch of Evil gets a lot of credit for that opening tracking shot, which is incredible, especially for the times. But Touch of Evil, I don't think as a full movie, it's as immaculate as some people present it as. It's quite good, but I don't love Touch of Evil like I love Blue Velvet. So Blue Velvet's going to move on. Bubble of Flambeur versus Vertigo. It's another Jean-Pierre Melville. Like I say, I guess Melville has 4 movies in this ranking. I think I'm going to go Vertigo, though. I'm going to go Hitchcock on this one. So there's one Melville that didn't move on. Oh, holy shit. Double Indemnity versus Sunset Boulevard. These are 2 Billy Wilder movies. 2 Billy Wilder movies going head-to-head. The thing is, these two could be like the final 2 if they were on opposite sides of the bracket. So this is where the randomization comes in. These two would easily make it through the first round if they were up against like anything else pretty much. Sunset Boulevard is an all-time classic. It would probably be a lot of people's pick. I have gone on record many times that Double Indemnity is my personal favorite film noir. And it's moving on, and it's probably a favorite to win this whole thing. But like I've always done with these tournaments, I'm not thinking about these matchups ahead of time, and I've managed to surprise myself in the other ones, so anything could happen here. The Blue Dahlia versus The Usual Suspects. The Usual Suspects is really good neo-noir, great script. I'm not going to let the Kevin Spacey creep factor into this particular decision. I'm going to try to cancel that out. Blue Dahlia is more of a classic film noir. Also one that's a bit less talked about. This is one of the Alan Ladd, Veronica Lake film noirs. If you don't know, they were kind of a duo. They were the like man and woman romantic coupling in a bunch of film noirs together, with her often being like a femme fatale and him often being like a gangster on the run or whatever. Blue Dahlia is a really good one. I also really like The Glass Key with them, which is I can see coming up in the next bracket. I think I'm going to give it to the Blue Dahlia because this is so thoroughly, this is like quintessential film noir in terms of like all the style and all the tropes and everything, and that's got to count for something above a neo-noir sometimes. So I'm going to go Blue Dahlia. And this is one that you might not have seen because it's not quite as popular as a lot of them. Okay, Night of the Hunter versus The Glass Key. I just talked about The Glass Key. It's another really good one with Veronica Lake and Alan Ladd again. But Night of the Hunter is a legendary piece of work. It's Charles Laughton's only film as a director. He did tons of movies as an actor. That's what he was mostly. Night of the Hunter is one of those movies that didn't get its acclaim. It didn't get its due until later on, until after Charles Laughton passed away, actually. It kind of slowly built up its reputation, was reevaluated, and now it's hailed as one of the greatest movies ever made, oftentimes. And it is extremely high quality. Night of the Hunter is going to move on. Strangers on a Train versus Jackie Brown. Okay, so we have Hitchcock versus Tarantino. That's quite a pairing. Strangers on a Train, I love a whole lot. It's not my favorite Hitchcock, but it's up there. It's in the top 10. Jackie Brown, I think sometimes unfairly gets labeled as Tarantino's like worst movie. That or Death Proof, which I think both of those are excellent. And Jackie Brown is the only Tarantino movie that I would call a film noir enough, at least, to factor into here. There's definitely some noir elements of Pulp Fiction, without a doubt. But I don't think I included Pulp Fiction in this ranking. I think Jackie Brown's the only Tarantino representation. Strangers on a Train is more classic film noir, not just because when it was released, but also in the stylization and the story. Strangers on a Train is going to move on. Okay, next up is Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid versus Rope. So Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid is Carl Reiner's noir spoof movie. It's a parody of the noir genre. And it's actually made by taking Steve Martin and like putting him into a bunch of actual film noir footage. I think it's a good palate cleanser for this tournament because it feels like a full-blooded film noir while also being a big change of pace. It's obviously a comedy and a spoof. It still takes the noir stylings seriously. Like it looks pretty authentic. And Steve Martin gives a really good performance. I think I'm actually going to give it the edge over Rope. I don't know if it'll move too much further in the tournament past this first round, but it's going to move on here. Okay, next up we actually have another comedy noir, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which you might not even think of as a noir, but it really is a noir. It's a pretty faithful traditional noir, honestly, that just then has the tune aspect injected into it. The story goes that it started off as a like rejected or a shelved script for a Chinatown sequel, and they added in Roger Rabbit and made it this like goofy, cartoony movie. Versus The Conversation, which is Francis Ford Coppola. I think this is the only Coppola noir. Oh, I'll be doing a gangster movie tournament as well. If you're wondering why there are some like gangster movie omissions, it's one, because I feel like people tend to conflate noir and gangster a little bit when they are different. And two, because I'm going to be doing a gangster tier list. So you'll see them in there, all the big gangster movies. If you're questioning why is The Godfather here, it's because one, I don't really consider it a noir, or some people would. Like I saw it pop up in some noir lists when I was compiling this. But two, it's going to be in my gangster movies list. The Conversation, however, I would call a film noir. It has that feeling. Part of that is even just like the saxophone soundtrack lends more of a noir atmosphere. But the story is much more thoroughly a noir story regardless. I think I'm going to go with Roger Rabbit, though. I think I'm going to buck the trends here and go with, because it really is like a traditional noir that has this zaniness injected into it. So that's interesting. And then next up, we're going to have the two comedy ones against each other in the next round. That'll be fun. That seems fitting in a way. Okay, next up, The Lost Highway versus The Killing. It's Lynch again. I got to go Lynch. The Killing is good, but The Killing is a noir that feels a lot like a procedural. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a Kubrick movie, by the way, The Killing. That's his movie. It's quite good, but The Lost Highway is cream of the crop right there. And last up in the first round, we have The Bad Sleep Well versus The Big Lebowski, the second Coen Brothers movie versus the third Akira Kurosawa movie. I don't think, did any of the other Kurosawa movies move on? Did Stray Dog move on? Yeah, Stray Dog did move on. So we already have one Kurosawa in here. The other Coen Brothers one did not move on. The Bad Sleep Well is one of my favorite Kurosawas. The Big Lebowski, that was one of my favorite Coen Brothers. They're both excellent. The Big Lebowski is a film noir where like the noir elements are all in the background, but it's very much pulling from the Dashiell Hammett and all the like classic noir books and old school noir movies. Even the title, The Big Lebowski, is a reference to all those movies like The Big Heat, The Big Combo. There's lots of noir movies with that in the title. Noir titles were kind of ridiculous. There were so many noir movies. I would say even like the bulk of them that were made during the heyday of the noir have titles that mean nothing. That mean nothing in the context of the movie. And they just either sounded cool or they sounded like other noir movies that were popular. Like there are a couple of trademark buzzwords that are in so many noir titles, like Whistle of all things. There are so many noir movies with the word whistle in their title. It is insane. The word naked. You have like Naked Jungle, Naked Killer, Naked Kiss, Naked Murder. There's like a million of them. Or any variation on the word jungle or whatever. There's just so many of them. So The Big Lebowski is kind of playing on big being put in so many titles. The Big Sleep, which moved on earlier. I think I am going to go The Big Lebowski for its distinctive nature. It really stands out in that way. The Bad Sleep Well is quite good, though. It doesn't feel like a full-blooded noir, and that might have something to do with it being a Japanese noir. And Japanese noir is definitely its own genre. It didn't feel quite as influenced by the core American noir movement as like European noir did, for an example. Like the European noir feels like an evolution of the American noir, whereas Japanese noir felt like it was pulling inspiration from American noir while definitely doing its own thing, which makes it stand out in a good way, I would say. But it is something to consider when we're talking about the best film noir ever made. I think I'm going to go Big Lebowski here, but Bad Sleep Well is phenomenal. Okay, that was our first round. Let's move on to the second round now. We're going to be revisiting movies now. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang versus The Third Man. I think a lot of these decisions are going to be tough, but some of them are going to be quite easy. This one's easy. The Third Man, moving on. Chinatown versus American Gigolo. So I love you, Paul Schrader, but Chinatown has to move on here. Chinatown might go the distance. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, Thief versus Sin City. This is an interesting pairing. I gotta think about this one for a second. Sin City is, well, neither of these are really traditional noir, so that doesn't factor into here. I think I might go Sin City. It definitely stands out from every other noir on this list with its hyper-stylized visuals and like excessive action and whatnot. So Sin City's not going to go all the way, but I like seeing it keep going. Okay, The Big Sleep versus Le Samurai. I think we're going to go The Big Sleep, the Bogart movie. Okay, The Hustler versus The Long Goodbye. The Long Goodbye is going to move on. It has the more traditional film noir story and style. Brute Force versus The Trial. I think we're going to stick with the cutting-edge surrealism here and go with The Trial. Brute Force is good, that one. It's one of those kind of like undersung classic movies. Mulholland Drive versus Croupier. So I like Croupier a whole lot. I consider Croupier extremely underseen and even a little underrated. I think it's one of the best gambling movies out there, but not one of the best film noirs necessarily. Mulholland Drive is going to move on. Le Cercle Rouge versus Army of Shadows. Here is that double Jean-Pierre Melville matchup. Out of these two, I actually already kind of said it. I do prefer Le Cercle Rouge. Army of Shadows is great as well. These two are excellent. But Le Cercle Rouge is gonna move on. Mikey and Nicky versus M. I think it's got to be M. Mikey and Nicky is excellent, but M is a more thorough noir and the more influential and innovative movie. Stray Dog versus Shallow Grave. This is no competition. Stray Dog's moving on easily. Okay, Blowout versus Anatomy of a Murder. These two are great. Blowout is De Palma, who had lots of noir influence in his work. Anatomy of a Murder, though, is the one that's moving on. Blue Velvet versus Vertigo. Lynch versus Hitchcock. I'm a Lynch fanboy, man. I can't help it. I also do think that Blue Velvet is the better noir. I just think it's the better movie in general. I know Vertigo's often touted as like the best Hitchcock or whatever, but I think Blue Velvet's a better movie. Double Indemnity versus Blue Dahlia. I'm glad that I could pass the Blue Dahlia through at least one round, but Double Indemnity blows it way out of the water. Okay, Night of the Hunter versus Strangers on a Train. Hitchcock is losing again. We're going Night of the Hunter on this one. Dead Man Don't Wear Plaid versus Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the two probably most outside-the-box films on this list. I think let's go Roger Rabbit. That's what's feeling right to me right here. And then Lost Highway versus Big Lebowski. Okay, interesting. This is tough. I think I'm leaning towards Lost Highway because it feels distinct and unique to David Lynch while also feeling like a full-blooded film noir, I would say. Even with the dreamy and nightmarish and surreal aspects, it still feels like a full-blooded noir story. Whereas The Big Lebowski, the noir stuff is more in the background. I think that's what I'm going to judge this on, and I think I'm going to give it to Lost Highway for that reason. Third Man versus Chinatown. This is a fucking tough one. These are two brutes. Just like Double Indemnity and Sunset Boulevard, I could see a world where these two come down to being the in the finals. I think I'm going to go Chinatown. Chinatown is just so immaculately directed and put together. Okay, Sin City versus The Big Sleep. I think this is where the stylized run of Sin City is going to come to an end, and The Big Sleep's going to move on. The Long Goodbye versus The Trial. The surrealism makes it feel less like a standard film noir. The Long Goodbye, however, is later. It's much after the film noir era. I think the storytelling, though, the Philip Marlowe character, Elliot Gould's great performance, Altman's strong direction. It's a great mystery story. I think I'm gonna go Long Goodbye here. Mulholland Drive versus Le Cercle Rouge. Let's see. Both of these are a little bit atypical of the genre, a little bit non-traditional. Le Cercle Rouge is like a gangster movie and a heist movie, in addition to being a noir. Mulholland Drive has all of Lynch's zaniness that he's known for. I'm feeling Mulholland Drive. I don't know. I'm gonna try to. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. The Lynch bias is showing. I know it. Okay, M versus Stray Dog. I'm gonna go M here. Anatomy of a Murder versus Blue Velvet. Okay, I'm gonna try to cancel out my Lynch bias, because I do actually think that Anatomy of a Murder is a more quintessential film noir. So I'm going to give it to Anatomy of a Murder. Double Indemnity versus Night of the Hunter is a fucking tough one. I mean, not really. It's double indemnity. Come on, double indemnity wins. Okay, Who Framed Roger versus Lost Highway. We're gonna get a Lynch moving on to the finals. Actually, I think we have two of them, or in the semifinals at least. Okay, back over to here. We've got Chinatown versus The Big Sleep. It's Chinatown. I mean, Chinatown is pretty easily able to dispatch most of these films. The Big Sleep is excellent. I mean, as evidenced by getting this far. But it does have a little bit of messiness. It kind of has some like glaring plot holes actually that you have to just avoid. But the thing with The Big Sleep is the dialogue is so fast and snappy that like you don't need to follow the plot. The scenes are all like Marlowe walks into a room and then there's this rat-a-tat dialogue for a while, then he leaves the room and you might not even know what actually happened as far as the plot progression is concerned. That's wonderful though. But Chinatown's moving on. Okay, and then we have The Long Goodbye versus Mulholland Drive. The Long Goodbye definitely feels more like a noir than Mulholland Drive does. I'm going to give it to The Long Goodbye. Even though Mulholland Drive is the better movie, I would say. And it's definitely my favorite of the two. I'm going to try to be an objective decider here and go with The Long Goodbye. Pains me a little bit, but we're going with it. Okay, M versus Anatomy of a Murder. I think it's going to be Anatomy of a Murder. Then we have Double Indemnity versus Lost Highway. I gotta go Double Indemnity. I think Double Indemnity might take it, but if it comes down to, well, I mean, we'll see. I don't know. I think Double Indemnity might go the distance. Chinatown versus The Long Goodbye. So this is easy. Chinatown easily beats this one. I feel like Chinatown would have a harder time beating movies like Sunset Boulevard or like Night of the Hunter, perhaps, or some of the other film noirs that have been beaten already by the other side of the bracket. But Chinatown beats Long Goodbye easily. And then on this side, Double Indemnity versus Anatomy of a Murder. It's Double Indemnity. I'm glad to see Anatomy of a Murder get this far though, because I think it does deserve it. It deserves infinite amount of love. And in the finals, yeah, this is a good final pairing because this one is tough. I mean, only one of them came out in the boom of film noir. Only one of them is technically a film noir full stop, whereas Chinatown is technically a neo-noir. We're talking best film noir ever made. That's something in its favor. I think even if you didn't factor that into it, I think Double Indemnity would have to win anyway. It is the quintessential film noir. If there's one film noir that you will judge the genre on, it has to be Double Indemnity. It has all the tropes and trademarks, I would say for better or worse, but there is no or worse, just for better. It does everything the noir genre is known for, the best that has ever been done. It is Double Indemnity. It's Double Indemnity. Double Indemnity also has like the quintessential film noir narration. People always think of film noir as like, whenever anyone parodies it, they do like the gruff, the somber, the brooding voiceover narration, right? A lot of film noirs, the majority of them, especially from the like classic film noir era, don't have narration or voiceover. Double Indemnity does that when it has the framing device of, you know, the flash forward at the start and he's recording his confession onto a wax cylinder, and then the bulk of the movie is the flashbacks and it comes full circle. It's beautiful, brilliantly done. Double Indemnity is my pick for the single best film noir ever made. Check out my other movie tournament videos and let me know in the comments any other tournaments you'd like to see in the future. Like I said, I will be doing gangster movies, war movies, post-apocalyptic movies, and zombie movies. Those are the ones that I have on the docket. Oh, and sci-fi movies. I'll do the sci-fi genre. If there are any others you want to see or any others you think of that you think might be interesting, let me know in the comments, and then subscribe so you don't miss anything else that I put out. I'll see you next time. So long.